the industrial canal and inner harbor of New Orleans. History, description, and economic aspects of giant facility created to encourage industrial expansion and develop commerce. By Thomas Ewing Dabney. The need recognized for a century. There is a map in the possession of Thompson of New Orleans, who has a notable collection of books and documents on the early history of this city, dated March 1, 1827, and drawn by Captain Pussin, topographical engineer, showing the route of a proposed canal to connect the Mississippi River and Lake Pontchartrain. Curiously near the site finally chosen for that great enterprise nearly 100 years later. New Orleans then was a mere huddle of buildings around Jackson Square, but with the purchase of the Louisiana Territory from France and the great influx of American enterprise that characterized the first quarter of the last century, development was working like yeast, and it was foreseen that New Orleans' future depended largely upon connecting the two waterways mentioned: the river that drains the commerce of the Mississippi Valley at our front door, and the lake with its shortcut to the sea and the commerce of the world at the back. When the Carondelet Canal, now known as the Old Basin Canal, was begun in 1794, the plan was to extend it to the river. It was also planned to connect the New Basin Canal, begun in 1833, with the Mississippi. This was in fact one of the big questions of the period. That the work was not put through was due more to the lack of machinery than of enterprise. During the rest of the century, the proposal bobbed up at frequent intervals, and the small Lake Borden Canal was finally shoved through from the Mississippi to Lake Borden, which is a bay of Lake Pontchartrain. The difference between these early proposals and the plan for the industrial canal and inner harbor that was finally adopted is that the purpose in the former case was simply to develop a waterway for handling freight, whereas the object of New Orleans' great facility, now nearing completion, is to create industrial development. Under the law of Louisiana, inherited from the Spanish and French regimes, river frontage cannot be sold or leased to private enterprise. This law prevents port facilities being sued up by selfish interests and ensures a fair deal for all shipping lines, new ones as well as old, with a consequent development of foreign trade. And port officials at harbors that are under private monopoly would give a pretty if the Louisiana system could be established there. But there is no law, however good, that meets all conditions, and a number of private enterprises, warehouses, and factories have undoubtedly been kept out of New Orleans because they could not secure water frontage. An artificial waterway capable of indefinite expansion, on whose banks private enterprise could buy or lease for a long period of time the land for erecting its buildings and plants, without putting in jeopardy the commercial development of the port, a waterway that would coordinate river, rail, and maritime facilities most economically and lend itself to the development of a. When the United States finally adopts that requisite to a world commerce, that was the recognized need of New Orleans when the proposal for connecting the two waterways came to the fore in the opening years of the present century. The Progressive Union, later the Association of Commerce, took a leading part in the propaganda. It was assisted by other public bodies and forward-looking men, who gradually wore away the opposition with which is received every attempt to do something that grandfather didn't do. And on July 9, 1914, the legislature of Louisiana passed Act No. 244, authorizing the Commission Council of New Orleans to determine the site, and the Board of Port Commissioners of Louisiana, or Dock Board as it is more commonly called, to build the industrial canal. The act gave the board a right to expropriate all property necessary for the purpose to build the necessary locks, slips, laterals, basins, and appurtenances in aid of commerce, and to issue an unlimited amount in bonds against the real estate and canal and locks and other improvements, to be paid out of the net receipts of said canal and appurtenances thereof, after the payment of operating expenses, and to fix charges for tolls in said canal. This was submitted to a vote of the people at the regular election in November of that year and became part of the Constitution. To avoid the complication of a second mortgage on the property, the Dock Board subsequently Ordinance of June 29, 1918, set a limit on the total bond issue. To enable the development that was then seen to be duly possible, it set this limit high at 2500. The canal for which the legislature made provision in 1914 bears about the relation to the one that was finally built as the acorn does to the oak. It was to be a mere barge canal that might ultimately be enlarged to a ship canal. Its cost was estimated at $2,400, which was less than the cost of digging the new basin canal nearly a century before, which was a great deal smaller and ran but halfway between the lake and river. The panic of the early days of the World War shoved even this modest plan to one side, and it was not until the next year that enthusiasm caught its second wind. Then the leading men and the press of the city put themselves behind the project once more. As the New Orleans item said, October 22, 1915. The lack of that canal has already proven to have cost the city much in trade and developed industry. Astonishing exhibition of intelligent public spirit. In New Orleans, the Chicago Tribune said that no other city in or near the Mississippi Valley, including Chicago, has shown such an awakening to the possibilities and rearrangements that are following the cutting of the Panama Canal. The awakening started with the talk of the new canal. Other papers throughout the country made similar expressions. In 1915, the engineering firm of Ford, Beck and Davis made a preliminary survey of conditions and how development would be affected by the canal. At about the same time, the Illinois legislature voted to spend $500 to construct a deep-water canal, giving Chicago water connection with the Mississippi River, and the New Orleans item linked the two projects when it said January 16, 1916. The Illinois Lake Michigan Canal and the New Orleans Industrial Canal are complementary links in a new system of waterways connecting the Upper Valley through the Mississippi River and New Orleans with the Gulf and the Panama Canal. This system again gives the differential to the valley cities in trade with the markets of the Orient, our own West Coast, and South America. Commodore Ernest Lee Yank, president of the Association of Commerce, issued a statement to the press January 16, 1916, declaring that the prospect of the canal brightened the whole business future of this city and the Mississippi Valley. The New Orleans Real Estate Board and the Auction Exchange in a joint meeting urged its speedy building, and Governor Lothery Hall, in a formal statement to the press January 16, 1916, gave his endorsement to the construction of the canal, long sought by many commercial interests of New Orleans. 3 months. In August 1916, the governor dismissed the Dock Board and appointed a new one. In the confusion attending the reorganization, the canal project was again dropped. The New Orleans American on August 28, 1916 attempted to revive it, but the effort fell flat, and the plan laid on ice until 1918. America had in the meantime thrown its hat into the ring, and the cry was going up for ships, and still more ships. National patriotism succeeded where civic effort had failed. New Orleans brought out its industrial canal project to help the country build the famous. But this new phase of the plan was far from the canal that was finally built. In fact, the accomplishment of this project has shown a remarkable development with the passing years, reminding one of the growth of the trivial hopes of the boy into the mighty achievement of the man. Ships could not be built on the Mississippi River. The 20-foot range in the water level would require the ways to make a long slope into the current, a work of prohibitive expense, and as nearly impossible from an engineering standpoint as anything can be. Early in 1918, a committee of representative Orleanians began to study the situation. This was known as the City Shipbuilding Committee. It comprised Mayor Behrman O's Morris, president of the Association of Commerce, Walter Parker, manager of that body, Arthur McGurk, special counsel of the Dock Board, was Hecht, president of the Hibernia Bank, Paul Saunders, president of the Canal Commercial Bank, O'Keefe, vice president of the Whitney Central Bank, Newman, financier, Earl Superintendent of the Sewerage and Water Board Hampton Reynolds, contractor Moore James Thompson, and Walker Ross of the Times Picayune item and states respectively. On February 10, 1918, this committee laid the plans for an industrial basin connected with the river by a lock and ultimately to be connected with the lake by a small barge canal. Ships could be built on the banks of this basin, the water in which would have a fixed level. Hecht and Arthur McGurk, special counsel of the dock board, devised the plan by which the project could be financed. The dock board would issue long-term bonds and build the necessary levees with the material excavated from the canal. The committee's formal statement summarized the public need of this facility as follows. It will prove an important facility in the equipment of New Orleans to meet the new competition the enlarged Erie Canal will create. The original Erie Canal harmed New Orleans because Mississippi River boat lines could not build their own terminal and housing facilities at New Orleans. Illustration via Kernigan Vice President Reen Clerk Secretary Albert McCahon McCloskey Commissioners Board of Commissioners of the Port of New Orleans. This meeting made industrial history in New Orleans. The Hecht plan was studied by lawyers and financiers and declared feasible. Hecht summarized the confidence of the provision men in the New Orleans when he declared in a public interview, "I feel there's absolutely nothing to prevent the immediate realization of New Orleans' long dream of becoming a great industrial and commercial center and having great shipbuilding plants located within the city limits." And the item said in commenting on the undertaking, February 17, 1918. Millions of dollars of capital will be ready to engage in shipbuilding in New Orleans the moment that piled rivers and steam shovels are set to work on the shiplock and navigation canal. It was a time of great industrial excitement. Victory was at last in the grasp of New Orleans. The eyes of the country were on New Orleans. The cry was, "Full speed ahead." Small canal first planned. The plan at this time was to have a lockcell only 16 or 18 feet deep. This would be sufficient to allow empty ships to enter or leave the canal, but not loaded. The mere building of ships was thus the principal thought, despite the rhetoric on commercial and industrial possibilities. Perhaps the leaders who were beating the project into shape were themselves afraid to think in the millions necessary to do the work to which New Orleans finally dedicated itself. Perhaps they realized that the figure would stagger the minds of the people and defeat the undertaking if they were not gradually educated up to the mark. Meeting on February 15, 1918, the dock board resolved unanimously to put the plan through if it proved feasible. Thompson was president of the board. The other members were Kelly, Thomas Kelly, Hans, and O'Gearan. Later, Lefay took Kelly's place on the board. The Public Belt Railroad Board had in the meantime, February 13, voted to pay the dock board $50 a year and the levee board February 14 to give $125 a year. As the plans were increased, the levee board later increased its bid to $925. Mayor Behrman Arthur McGurk and Hecht laid the proposition before both bodies. Action was unanimous. Colonel J. Hill, speaking for the Belt Railroad Board, said, "I am glad that at last there has been outlined a plan which seemingly makes it possible to construct the canal. It will not only result in the eventual construction of a big fleet of ships, but will prepare the way for a tremendous industrial activity in other lines. The consensus has been that a navigation canal is needed to induce large manufacturers, importers, and exporters to establish their factories and warehouses here. This project will be the opening wedge." Members of the Public Belt Board voting, besides Colonel Hill and Mayor Behrman ex officio, were Gander Abbott, Arthur Simpson, John Murphy, Bloomfield, Adam Lorch, George Thompson, Thomas Cunningham, Victor Lambeau, Edgar Stern, and Sam Sigari. Members of the levee board voting were William Cole, Sox President Thomas Killeen, Thomas Smith, John F. Muller, James Williams, John Vision. Old Thompson President put the matter before the dock board. He said, according to the minutes of the meeting of February 15, 1918, had always received his approval, and he thought that the mayor would recall that in the preparation, he with the city attorney had a very considerable part in framing the same, and he had taken an active interest in the matter. He had always been in favor of the industrial canal, and he believed in the possibility of development of New Orleans through this as a terminus. And it was entirely logical that the dock board should do all that may lie within its power to bring about the successful consummation of this project. The only doubt in his mind being as to the feasibility of the project from the financial standpoint. It seems now, however, that a plan has been devised through efforts of the mayor and Merhecht which gives every promise of success. The cooperation of the city on behalf of the Public Belt Railroad and of the Levee Board apparently removed the difficulties in respect to the financial end. The dock board welcomes the assistance and cooperation of the city and of the Levee Board, but inasmuch as these boards are merely contributing certain amounts per year, and whereas the dock board is the obligor in respect of the principal of the bond issue, it devolves upon the dock board to use great caution before committing itself to any particular plan in a matter which so vitally affects the credit of the dock board, the city of New Orleans, and the Levee Board. President Thompson further stated that he unhesitatingly endorsed the project and that he was sure that every member of the board agreed, and the board would be glad to give prompt consideration to the particular plan in question and reach some conclusion which will ensure the realization of this great project. To estimate the probable cost of the canal, Mayor Behrman appointed the following committee of engineers: Hardy, city engineer of Barclay, engineer of the Public Belt Railroad, George Aero, superintendent of the Sewerage Water Board, Rayner, engineer of the Levee Board, and Hampton Reynolds, contractor. On February 22, the committee reported that, not counting real estate, the canal could be built for $2,626,876. This estimate called for a lock 600 feet long, 70 feet wide, and 18 feet deep, and a barge canal to the lake. The cost of constructing the lock was put at $1,376,660, and of digging the canal $1,256,216. This report was first received by a special committee composed of Mayor Behrman, Thompson, Cole, Hill, Hecht, and Mayor Unkel. Sox. This committee referred it to the dock board, which adopted it February 22. Financial arrangements were completed at this same meeting. In order to have sufficient to pay for the land which would have to be expropriated for the canal, and to give some leeway, it was decided to issue bonds for $3,500 with an option of floating $100 more within 30 days. A financial syndicate consisting of the Hibernia Interstate and Whitney Central Banks of New Orleans, the William R. Compton Investment Company of St. Louis, and the Halsey Stuart Company of Chicago agreed to take the entire issue. The bonds were to run 40 years and begin to mature serially after 10 years. They were to bear 5% interest and to be sold at $9.85. They would be secured by a mortgage on the real estate of the canal site and by the taxing powers of the state, for they were a recognized state obligation, as Arthur Kirk, special counsel of the dock board, pointed out in his opinion of July 10, 1918. I am likewise of opinion that said bonds are unaffected by any limitations upon the state debt or upon the rate of taxation for public purposes, that the said bonds are entitled to be paid out of the general funds or by the exercise of the power of taxation in so far as the revenues, funds, or property preferentially pledged or mortgaged to secure said issue may fail or be insufficient to pay the same. The following sat with the dock board and its attorneys at the meeting of February 22: Mayor Behrman, Hill of the Public Belt Railroad, Hecht, president of the Hibernia Bank, O'Keefe, vice president of the Whitney Central Bank, Reeves, vice president of the Interstate Bank, or Compton of the Compton Investment Company, Stuart of Halsey Stuart and Company, Hardy, city engineer, and Hampton Reynolds, contractor. The selection of the site was left by the state law to the Commission Council. There were a number of possible routes, and the selection was made with the utmost secrecy to prevent real estate profiteering. At first, the area bounded by France and Rennes streets was chosen. This was on February 28. On May 9, however, the site was changed to the area bounded by France and Lazurde streets north from the Mississippi River to Florida Walk, thence to Lake Pontchartrain. This is a virtually uninhabited region in the 3rd District, through the old Ursulines tract. The site chosen for expropriation is 5 1/3 miles long by 200 feet wide, 897 acres. For this land the dock board paid $1,493,532.24, which is at the rate of $1,665 an acre. The valuation was reached by expropriation proceedings. In the meantime, Commodore Ernest Lee Young had asked to be allotted the first site on the industrial canal, and Dola Williams for the second. Both were for shipyards. The foundation company, which was operating a number of shipyards in various parts of the country, sent an engineer here to see if it would be feasible for the concern to build a shipyard here. Even before the piled rivers and dredges were on the job, the millions were being counted for investment in the city, whose remarkable enterprise had won the admiration of the country. The dirt begins to fly. Until the money for the bond issue should be available, the Hibernia Bank authorized the dock board to draw against it on open account. It only remained then to secure the authorization of the Capital Issues Committee of the Federal Reserve Board, which controlled all bond issues during the World War, to start the work. The grounds on which the authorization was requested summarize conditions that make possible a great industrial development in New Orleans, and will stand quoting. They are state control of the canal facilities and operation of the same, not for profit but for the economical and expeditious development of shipbuilding. 2 shipyards were established on the canal. They poured millions of dollars into New Orleans. The tremendous tonnage built in the United States during the war, and the slump in foreign trade that followed the armistice due to financial conditions abroad, have caused many shipyards throughout the United States to close down, among them one of these at New Orleans. The other one is now finishing its war contracts and will be more or less inactive until the demands of the American merchant marine and business in general open up again. If they are not used for shipbuilding, they can be used for ship repairing or building barges. And it is obvious that the same conditions that made shipbuilding an economic possibility will encourage other industrial production, especially production that requires the coordination of river, rail, and maritime facilities. The canal means millions of new money to New Orleans, as its proponents said it would. On March 12, the authorization of the Capital Issues Committee was given. On March 15, the George Goethals Company was retained as consulting engineers on the big job. The services of this company were secured as much for its engineering skill, proven by its work on the Panama Canal, as for the prestige of its name. The Goethals Company, cooperating with the engineers of the dock board which did the work, designed the famous lock and directed the entire job. George M. Wells, vice president of the firm, was put in active charge of the work. General Goethals made occasional visits of supervision. The dirt began to fly on June 6, 1918. Before coming to New Orleans to take up his work, Wells, acting upon instructions of the dock board, called at the office of the foundation company in New York, whose engineer had already studied the possibilities of establishing a shipyard on the canal and guaranteed an outlet to the sea by the time its vessels should be finished. The river end of the site chosen for the canal consisted of low and flat meadow land. There were a few houses helter-skeltered about like blocks in a nursery, but the principal signs of human life were the cows that grazed where the grazing was good, and sought refuge from the noonday beams of the sun under the occasional oaks that had strayed out into the open and didn't know how to get back. The middle of the site, several miles in extent, was a grey cypress swamp with 500 or 600 trees to the acre and always awash. The lake end was trembling prairie. Marshland subject to tidal overflow and very soft, with dredges, spades, mechanical excavators, pile drivers, and dynamite, the work opened. A great force of men began to throw up by hand the levees that were to serve as banks for the turning basin, the lock, and other portions of the canal. This levee would keep the liquid material dredged out from running back into the excavation. The turning basin, 950 feet by 150 feet, was an expansion of the original industrial basin. Situated several hundred feet from the lock, it proposes to enable ships entering the canal from the river and passing through the lock to turn in, as well as to furnish a site for the concentration of industries. The foundation company had in the meantime decided to establish a shipyard on this basin. Its engineers were on the ground and its material was rolling. One dredge was sent around Lake Pontchartrain to commence boring in from that end. This could not be done on the river end. The Mississippi is too mighty a giant to risk such liberties. The 20-foot cut between the river and the lock would have to be done last of all, when the rest of the canal and the lock were finished, and the new levees that would protect the city against its overflow were solidly set. But a few hundred feet from the turning basin was Bayou Benvenue, which runs into Lake Borden, part of Lake Pontchartrain, and one of the refuges of Lafayette in the brave days when smuggling was more a sport of the plain people than it is now, with European travel restricted to the wealthy. So through Bayou Benvenue a small excavator was sent to cut a passage into the turning basin to allow the mighty 22-inch dredges to get in and work outwards towards the lake and the lock site. The problem was further complicated by the Florida walk drainage system, which emptied into Bayou Benvenue, and by the railway lines that crossed the site of the canal. These railways were the Southern Railway at the lake end, the Louisville-Nashville at the middle, and the Southern and Public Belt near the turning basin on Florida Walk. For them, the dock board had to build tracks to be used while their lines were cut to enable the dredging to be made and the bridges to be constructed. For the drainage, the plans called for the construction of an inverted siphon passing under the canal, a river under a river, so to speak. In the meantime, however, the drainage canal had to be blocked off with 2 cofferdams to cut off the water from the city and the bayou and enable the construction of the siphon between. Additional railroad tracks, too, had to be built to handle the immense volume of material needed for the work. Roads had to be built for getting supplies on the job by truck. The trolley line had to be extended for the transportation of labor. Week by week the labor gangs grew as the men were able to find places in the attacking line of the industrial battle. Great excavators stalked over the land, pulling themselves along by their dippers, which bit out chunks of earth as big as a cart when they. The smack of pile drivers, the thump of dynamite, and the whistle of dredges filled the air. Buildings sprouted like mushrooms in the meadow, half a mile from the nearest water. The shipyard of the foundation company began to take form. It was the plan to finish the canal by January 1920. Canal plans expanded. Work in the meantime had begun on the commodity warehouse and wharf, another facility planned by the dock board to relieve the growing pains. Built on the canal but opening on the river, it was to perform the same service for general commodities as the public cotton warehouse and the public grain elevator did for those products. Though not a part of the canal plan, the construction of the warehouse at this point was part of the general scheme to concentrate industrial development on that waterway. Later, the federal government took over this work and gave New Orleans a 1300 terminal through which it handled Army supplies. It is still using the 3 warehouses for storage purposes, but has leased the half-mile double-deck wharf to the dock board, which is devoting it to the general commerce of the port. In time, the dock board hopes to get at least one of the buildings. There can be no doubt but that the enterprise of New Orleans in building the industrial canal had a great deal to do with the government's determination to establish a depot at New Orleans. On May 30, the news came out of Washington that the Dulles-Williams Shipbuilding Company had been awarded a 1500 contract by the Emergency Fleet Corporation to build 8 ships of 9,600 tons each. This was the largest shipbuilding contract that had been given the South. The industrial canal rendered it possible. The firm of Dulett Williams had been engaged for 15 years or so in the civil engineering and contracting business in New Orleans. Captain Dulett had built launches with his own hands when a young man and dreamed of the time when he would have a yard capable of turning out ocean-going vessels. The Dulett Williams Shipbuilding Company was organized April 25, 1918 with the following officers: Dulett, President Paul Dulett, Vice President Horace Williams, Secretary Treasurer and General Manager Guerin, Chief Engineer, and James Ewan, Assistant Chief Engineer. I feel that New Orleans is on the eve of a very remarkable development, said Senator Ransdell of Louisiana in a telegram of congratulation, and earnestly hope our people will continue to work together with energy and hearty accord until we have gone way over the top in shipbuilding and many other lines. Over the top had not become the pest that it and other wartime weeds of rhetoric have subsequently proven. That was a time when one could still refer to it without causing a gnashing of teeth. Picking the site at the Lake Pontchartrain end of the canal, Dulett Williams Shipbuilding Company began to erect its shipyard. The plant buildings were erected upon tall paling. As the dredges excavated the material from the cut, they deposited it on the site of the shipyard and raised the elevation several feet, so the buildings were only the usual height above the ground. Both sides of the canal, it should be added, have been similarly raised by excavation material. It was planned that the ships from the Dulett Williams yard should be sent out into the world through Lake Pontchartrain, which empties into the Gulf of Mexico. There was ample water in the lake without dredging to accommodate unloaded ships of this size. But the fact that ships 400 or so feet long and drawing when loaded to capacity 27 feet were to be built at New Orleans emphasized the belief of those directing the work of the industrial canal that the plan on which they were working was too small. An 18-foot canal would not meet the growing needs of New Orleans. Accordingly, the dock board instructed the engineering department to expand the plans. By June 11, 1918, the plans had been revised to give a 25-foot channel. This would accommodate all but the largest ships that come to New Orleans. The cost of such a lock and canal, George Wells estimated, would be $600 or $2,500 more than the estimate for the original canal. The levee board promptly raised its ante to $250 to guarantee the interest. When the dock board floated the first bond issue of $3,500 in February at 95, it reserved the option to issue another $100 of bonds within 30 days at the same rate. For $1,500 of the new issue, the same syndicate of banks offered $9,712 or 2.5 points higher than for the first, but for the other million, they held the board to the original rate of 95. President Thompson reported to the dock board June 11 that he considered these. He added, "We were able to secure these better prices and conditions because the bond market is in a somewhat better condition now than it was when we made the original contract." The contract was accepted on that date, and application made to the Capital Issues Committee for the necessary permission. This was given in due time, though there was considerable opposition. The opposition, said President Thompson at the dock board meeting of February 26, 1919, reviewing the development of the canal plans, was inspired by vicious and spectacular attacks of certain private interests hostile to the canal project and to the port of New Orleans. Railroads whose right-of-way crossed the canal were the principal propagandists. They realized that the dock board could not be required to build their bridges over the waterway, and although the Thompson board financed the work at the time, they knew that sooner or later would come a day of reckoning. The Hudson board has since then taken steps to collect several $1 million from these roads. But why build a canal almost large enough only? Why build a 25-foot lock when ships drawing 30 feet of water come to New Orleans? A lock cannot be enlarged once it is completed, and the tendency of the times is towards larger ships. Why not make a capacity facility while they were about it? Illustration: Locksite driving sheet piling. These were questions the dock board asked itself, and on June 29, 1918 it decided to build a lock with a 30-foot depth over the sill at extreme low water and make the canal 300 feet wide at the top and 150 feet wide at the bottom. To do this would cost about $100 more, it was estimated by George Wells of the Goethals Company, a sum which the dock board thought would be realized from the rental revenues of Dowlett Williams and the Foundation Company without increasing the second bond issue. This is the canal that was finally built, nearly 70% larger than the one that was begun, and about 100% larger than the one originally planned. When the newspapers and forward-looking told the people that the lack of such a canal had cost New Orleans millions of dollars in development. Digging the ditch. No rock problem was encountered in dredging the canal. The cost was below what the engineers estimated. It would be less than 30 cents a cubic yard. But a novel situation did develop, a condition that would have sent the cost skyrocketing if an Orleanian had not met the difficulty. Louisiana is what geologists call a region of subsidence. The Gulf of Mexico formerly reached to where Cairo Hill now is. Washings from the land during the slow-moving centuries pushed the shoreline ever outward. The humus of decaying vegetation raised the ground surface still higher. This section of Louisiana, built by the silt of the Mississippi, was of course the most recent formation. 20,000 years ago, say the geologists, there were great forests where Louisiana now is. Among these mighty trees roamed the Glyptodon, the 16-foot armadillo with a tail like the morning star of the old crusaders, monstrously magnified; the giraffe camel, the titanother; the Columbian elephant, about the size of a trolley car, and with 15-foot tusks; the giant sloth, which could look into a second-story window. Here the saber-toothed tiger fought with the megatherium. Mighty rhinoceroses sloshed their clumsy way, and huge and grotesque birds filled the air with their flappings. As the subsoil packed more solidly, this wilderness in time sunk beneath the waters. The Mississippi built up its sandbars again, storms shaped them above the waves, marsh grass raised the surface with its humus, and another forest grew. This in turn sunk. And so the process was repeated time after time. At different depths below the surface of the ground, the remains of these forests are found today, the wood perfectly preserved by the dampness. And through this tangled mass the dredges had to fight their way. It was a task too great for the ordinary type of 20 or 22-inch suction dredge, even with the strength of 10 horses behind it. When they met these giant stumps and trunks, they just stopped. Wood of the Sewerage and Water Department had already designed and patented a centrifugal pump impeller adapted to the handling of sewerage containing trash. Learning of this, White, superintendent of dredging on the canal, asked him to design a special impeller along similar lines for the dredge Texas. Results from the invention were remarkable. During the 30 days immediately preceding the installation, the dredge had suffered delays from cloud suction which totaled 13,034 horse. During the 30 days immediately succeeding installation, the total of delays for the same reason was cut down to 7,112 horse. The average yardage was for the earlier period 152 an hour of actual excavation, and for the later period 445 an hour, an increase of almost 200%. The situation had been met. This was the period when the cost of labor and material began to jump. Employers were bidding against each other for men, and the government's work practically fixed the price of supplies. George Wells, consulting engineer, in his report of December 9, 1918 to the dock board, summarized labor increases over the scale when the work was begun as follows: unskilled labor 54, pile driver men 40, machinists 40, blacksmiths 40, foremen, and monthly 15 to 40, an average increase of 40. Materials had advanced, he went on to show, as follows: gravel 72, sand 25, cement 10, lumber form 70, timber 40, piles untreated 40, piles treated 25. These increases, together with the expansion of the plans requiring a canal of maximum depth instead of the pellet cut of 15 feet as originally planned. The insistence of the levee board that levees in the back areas must be raised to elevation 30, development of unforeseen and unforeseeable quicksand conditions in the various excavations, requirements of railroads for bridges of greater capacity and strength than needed, building of a power line to the foundation company's plant, not a dock board job, but one that the conditions required it should finance, then, and other expenses besides delaying the work made another bond issue necessary to finish the job. At its meeting of February 26, 1919, President Thompson laid the matter before the board. It decided to issue 600 of bonds, for which the same syndicate of bankers that had taken the other two offered 96. Liberty bonds were then selling at a big discount, and this seemed the best terms on which the money could be secured. This gave a total issue of 1200 to date, the interest on which amounted to 600 a year. The levee board raised its share of the to 550 to guarantee the interest. The public belt railroads 50 made the total complete. In the meantime, ships were beginning to bulk large on the ways of the foundation and the Dowlett-Williams yards. The foundation company launched its first, the Gotcha 200-ton, non-sinkable steel ship built for the French government in September 1919, and the Dowlett-Williams Company launched its first, the New Orleans, a steel vessel of 600 tons, the largest, turned out south of Newport News, built for the shipping board in January 1920. These were followed by 4 sister vessels from the foundation yard and 7 from the Dowlett-Williams plant. The former went to sea through Bay Bienvenue and the latter through Lake Pontchartrain. The Dowlett-Williams yard is a large one. Originally planning a mere assembling yard, the foundation company had subsequently developed the greatest steel fabricating plant in the South, so confident it was that New Orleans would carry through the project. And to the New Orleans Army Supply Base that Uncle Sam was building on the river end of the industrial canal was rapidly raising the facility that was to double the port storage capacity of New Orleans when it was finally completed in June 1919. The canal is 513 miles long. Between river and lock, the canal prism will be 125 feet wide at the bottom and 275 feet at the top. Between the lock and the lake, 150 feet wide at the bottom and 300 feet wide at the top. It is an excavation job of 10,000 cubic yards. 500,000 flat cars would be required to carry that dirt, a train more than 40 miles long. By September 1919, the canal had been entirely dredged, except for the 20-foot channel between the lock and river, which must be left until the last, to a width of about 150 feet and a depth of 26 feet. Since then, the labor has been concentrated upon the lock, but 26 feet will float a vessel carrying 60 bales of cotton. Full dimensions, however, will be developed, and the canal, with a system of laterals and basins such as are found in Europe, will be an inner harbor capable of indefinite expansion. Overwhelming endorsement by New Orleans. When the canal was about half finished, it received the most tremendous endorsement by every interest of New Orleans in its history. The question was put squarely before the people. Do you think it is a good thing, and you are willing to be taxed to put it across, and if so, how much? It is absolutely necessary to the industrial progress of the city. We must have the canal at all costs and are willing to be taxed any amount for it. On September 24, 1919, George Wells, consulting engineer, made a report to the dock board showing that the last bond issue of 600 had been exhausted and about 500 more was needed to finish the canal. This was in the last days of the Thompson board, and it took no action. The HUDS board entered upon its duties October 2. It comprised William O. Hudson, President, William A. Kernigan, Reenf, Clerk, Albert Mackay, Thomas Roberts. Later, Roberts resigned and Huck McCloskey took his place. All are sound businessmen with the interests of the port at heart. They found in the bank only 267,845.37 to the industrial Canal account. After deducting the obligations already made, there was left only 112,64.43 to continue the work. Without a public expression from New Orleans, they were unwilling to incur the responsibility of issuing 500 more bonds. President Hudson called a series of meetings of the representative interests of the city to decide what was to be done. As the people of New Orleans had decided to begin the canal in the first place, it was only right that they should determine whether the undertaking, costing 5 times as much as the original plan, should be carried through. The governor, the mayor, presidents of banks, committees of commercial exchanges, the president of the Public Belt Railroad, the president of the levee board, newspaper publishers, labor leaders, and prominent businessmen were invited. Likewise, a general call was made to the community at large to express an opinion as to finishing the canal. President Hudson outlined the attitude of the dock board as follows. The floating of the bond issue is a simple matter, if you men think we ought to do it, but where is the money for meeting the interest to come from? The 600 interest on bonds now outstanding is being paid 550 by the levee board and 50 by the Public Belt Railroad. The Public Belt's share is paid from its earnings, but the levee board's share is being paid by direct taxation on the citizens of New Orleans. Must we increase that tax? I personally won't object to any taxation as a citizen to pay my part towards financing the canal. I want to see the canal completed. But it is up to the people of New Orleans to say whether they are willing to assume the added obligation. Ross Hecht, president of the Hibernia Bank and a recognized financial leader in New Orleans, then arose. He said that all who have the future of New Orleans at heart must agree that we are here to discuss not whether the canal is to be finished, but how. Are we to be taxed for 50 years for our investment of 1200 and get no return, or are we willing to pay a little bit more and get something worthwhile? That expressed the sentiment of the meeting. The people of New Orleans, said Huck McCloskey, financier and dean of all dock board presidents, have never failed to meet a crisis. It is the duty of the dock board to finish the canal, no matter what the doubting Thomases may say. Similar expressions were made by Thomas Killeen, president of the levee board, Thomas Cunningham of the Public Belt Railroad, Moore, editor of the Times-Picayune, James Thompson, publisher of the item, Casson, president of the Association of Commercial, and Poole, president of the Marine Bank, E. Bowden, president of the Whitney Central Bank, Bernard McCloskey, attorney Frank Hayne of the Cotton Exchange, Jefferson Hardin of the Board of Trade, William Sieber, representative of the 9th Ward, Marshall Ballard, editor of the item. Others present assenting by their silence included John Clark, president, and East Butler, member of the Cotton Exchange, Horace Williams of Dolet Williams Shipbuilding Company, Stafford State Senator Hugh Rives of the Interstate Banks, DeMilt, president of the New Orleans Steamship Association, Dietrich of the Bienville Warehouse Corporation, Edgar Stern, Milton Boylan, Burns, Hamilton, and about 30 other representative business and professional men. Mayor Behrman John Banville, president of the Brewery Workers Union, and George Moore, president of the Building Trades Council, at a subsequent meeting, gave their endorsement. With only one dissenting voice, these meetings were unanimous that the industrial canal must be completed at all costs, that without it the growth of the city would be seriously interrupted. The one protest was by the Southern Realty and Securities Company. It was made October 23 against the levee board's underwriting the interest on the new bond issue. On that date, the levee board unanimously voted to guarantee these interest charges amounting to $375 a year. This brings the total being paid by that body out of direct taxation to $925 a year. The other $50 is paid by the Public Belt Railroad. To provide a leeway against the engineers' estimates, the dock board made provision for a bond issue of $7,500, but actually issued only $500 worth. This was taken by the same syndicate of bankers that had taken the previous issues, but this time they paid par. That was a point on which President Hudson had insisted. The contract was accepted December 10, 1919. And the work went on with every effort concentrated on economical construction. Siphon and bridges. As an incident in the work of building the industrial canal, it was necessary to create a disappearing river. This is the famous siphon, the quadruple passage of concrete that will carry the city's drainage underneath the shipway. It is one of the largest structures of its kind in the country. A word about New Orleans' drainage problem. The city is the bowl of a dish of which the levees against river and lake are the rim. There is no natural drainage. The rainfall is nearly 5 feet a year, concentrated at times upon the 1,000 miles of streets, into cloudbursts of 4 inches and horrend 10 inches in a day. In the boyhood of men now in their early 30s, it was a regular thing for the city to be flooded after a heavy rain. To meet the situation, New Orleans has constructed the greatest drainage system in the world. There are 6 pumping stations on the east side of the river, connected with each other by canals and with a discharge capacity of more than 10 cubic feet a second. The 7 billion gallons of water that these pumps can move a day would fill a lake 1 mile square and 35 feet deep. 3 of the canals empty into Lake Pontchartrain, the 4th, the Florida Walk Canal, into Bayou Bienvenue, which leads into Lake Borgne, an arm of Pontchartrain. Because of this drainage contamination, the lake shorefront of New Orleans has been held back in its development. Yet it is an ideal site for a suburb on a beautiful body of water, and just half a dozen miles from the business district. So the Sewerage and Water Board has been planning ultimately to turn the city's entire drainage into Bayou Bienvenue, a stream with swamps on both sides running into a lake surrounded by marsh. The industrial canal crosses the Florida Walk drainage canal. This made it necessary to build the inverted siphon. A siphon in the ordinary sense is a bent tube, one section of which is longer than the other, through which a liquid flows by its own weight over an elevation to a lower level. But siphon here is an engineering term to describe a channel that goes under an obstruction the canal and returns the water to its former level. Like the famous rivers that drop into the earth and appear again miles further on, the Florida drainage canal approaches to within 100 or so feet of the industrial canal, then dives 40 feet underground, passes beneath the shipway, and comes to the surface on the other side in front of the pumping station, which lifts it into Bayou Bienvenue. At first it was planned to build a comparatively small siphon, but while the plans were being drawn, New Orleans entered upon its tremendous development. The engineers threw away their blueprints and began over again. They designed one that is capable of handling the entire drainage of the city. And in April 1920 it was finished, a work of steel and concrete and machinery costing nearly $750,000 and with a capacity of 20 cubic feet of water a second, 7,200 and hour 172,800 a day. It was a work that presented many difficulties. First, the Florida Walk Canal had to be closed by 2 cofferdams. The space between was pumped out, the excavation was made, and the driving of foundation piling began. Quicksands gave much trouble. They flowed into the cut until they were stopped with sheet piling. The piles were from 30 to 60 feet in length and from 3 to 5 feet apart on centers. 46 feet below the ground surface, 26 carats datum, was laid the concrete floor of the siphon. The siphon is divided into 4 compartments. There are 2 storm chambers measuring 10 by 13 feet each, 1 normal weather chamber measuring 4 by 10 feet, and 1 public utilities duct measuring 6 by 10 feet. These are inside dimensions. The floor of the siphon is 2 feet thick, the roof 1 foot 9 inches. The whole structure is a solid piece of concrete and capable of standing a pressure of more than 20 pounds to the square foot. Its total length is 378 feet. The shipway passing over it is 105 feet wide and 30 feet deep. In the public utilities sector carried the city's water pipes, cables, telephone and telegraph wires and gas mains. The storm chambers will handle the rainfall of cloudbursts. In ordinary weather, the water will be concentrated through the smaller chamber in order to produce a strong flow and reduce the settlement of sediment to a minimum. 8 sluice gates, each 6 by 10 feet, open or close the water chambers. They are operated by hydraulic cylinders of the most approved type. For sending workmen inside the siphon to make repairs or clearing away an obstruction, there are 8 manholes. 4 measure 6 by 13 feet, 2 6 by 6 feet, and 2 6 by 4 feet. As soon as the Florida Walk Canal can be deepened and a few link-ups in the drainage system can be made, the entire drainage of New Orleans in normal weather and during light storms will, according to announcement by the Sewerage and Water Board, be sent through this outlet. During the occasional cloudbursts, it will be necessary to send some of the drainage into the lake, but this will be rapidly flowing water and will sweep offshore. It means a great deal to the suburban development of the city. A year and a half the siphon was in the making. Preparations for the structure cost more than $250. Excavation foundation. The concrete alone cost $170. Machinery and the work of housing and installing it cost $60 more. 4 bascule steel bridges now cross the industrial canal. They are the largest in the city. 3 of them at Florida Walk for the Southern and Public Belt Railways, Gentilly for the Louisville, Nashville, and on the lakefront for the Southern, weigh 600 pounds each, superstructure only. The 4th at the lock weighs 100 pounds. They are balanced by 800 in concrete blocks and concrete adjustment blocks. Their extreme length is 160 feet. The moving leaf has a span of 117 feet. With a 30-foot right-of-way for railroad tracks, 11 feet for vehicles and trolley cars, and 4 feet for pedestrians, they are designed to meet traffic conditions of a great and growing city. They will support 50-ton streetcars or 15-ton road rollers. New Orleans has nothing as heavy as that now, and trains a great deal heavier than are now coming to the city. No bridge in the South will support as heavy loads. The tensile strength of the steel of which the bridges are constructed is from 55 to 85 pounds to the square inch, and they will bear a wind load of 20 pounds to the square inch of exposed surface. They are operated by 275 horsepower electric motors, 440 volts, 60 cycle, 3-phase current, which is stepped down from 200 volts by means of transformers. In addition, there is a 36 horsepower gasoline engine to be used if the electrical equipment is out of order. To open or close the bridges will require a minute and a half. The remarkable lock. Not only is the lock of the industrial canal one of the largest in the United States, but its construction solved a soil problem that was thought impossible. That of the Panama Canal is simple in comparison. The design is unique in many respects. The lock is a monument to the power of men over the forces of nature and to the progress of a community that will not say die. Because of the great variation in the level of the river at low and high water, a matter of 20 feet, it was necessary to make the excavation for building the lock about 50 feet deep. In solid soil this would be a simple matter. But this ground has been made by the gradual deposit of Mississippi River silt upon what was originally the sandy bed of the ocean, and through these deposits run strata of water-bearing sand or quicksand. This flows into a cut and causes the banks to cave and slide into the excavation. Underneath there is a pressure of marsh gas which, with the pressure of the collapsing banks, squeezes the deeper layers of quicksand upwards, creating boils and blowing up the bottom. New Orleans has had plenty of experiences with these flowing sands in its shallow sewerage excavations. How then expect to make an excavation 50 feet deep? asked the doubting Thomases. It couldn't be done. The quicksands would flow in too fast. The dredges would drain the surrounding subsoil, but that wouldn't get beyond a certain depth. Furthermore, what assurance was there that the soil that far down would supply sufficient friction to hold the piles necessary to sustain the enormous weight of the lock and the ships passing through it? Undaunted by these croakings, the engineers from test borings calculated the sliding and flowing character of the soil and estimated the various pressures that would have to be counteracted. Balanced this with the holding power of pine and steel and concrete, evolved a plan and began an excavation of a hole 350 feet wide by 500 feet long, gradually sloping the cut 1:4 ratio to a center where the lock 120 by 150 feet outside dimensions was to be built. Illustration: Inner Harbor, Navigation Canal Lock and vicinity. The gentle slope of the cut was to prevent slides. It had been ascertained that the first stratum of quicksand began 28 feet below the ground surface, 3 carodatum, and was 3 feet thick. The second stratum, 48 feet below the surface, 23 carodatum, and 10 feet thick. Coarser sand extended 11 feet below this from 33 carodatum. The second stratum of flowing sand began just below where the lock floor had to be laid. The third layer was 80 feet below the surface, 55 carodatum. The tips of the piling would just miss it. Excavation began in November 1918. While the dredges were at work, a wooden sheet piling cofferdam was driven completely around the lock and about 125 feet from the edge of the bank to cut off the first quicksand stratum. About 150 feet further in, when the excavation was well advanced, a second ring of sheet piling was driven to cut off the second stratum, which carried a static pressure of 55 feet and was just a foot or so below where the floor of the lock would be. It was not thought necessary to cut off the third stratum. The excavation was made in the wet. When it was finished, the dredges moved back into the canal, the entrance closed, and the work of unwatering the lock site began. This was in April 1919. There had never been such a deep cut made in this section. Consequently, the character of the soil, while it could be estimated, could not be known absolutely. And the exact pressure of the gas could not be known. The sands proved to be more liquid and the gas pressure stronger than anticipated. Quicksands ran through the sheet piling as through a sieve. The walls of the excavation began to slough and cave. The gas pressure became alarming when the weight of earth and water was taken off. Sand balls began to develop at the bottom. The floor of the cut was blowing up. The fate of the industrial canal hung in the scale. To meet the situation, the engineers pumped a great volume of water into the excavation. Its weight counterbalanced the earth pressure of the side and the gas pressure of the bottom. Then another ring of sheet piling was driven inside the other two. This one was of steel, and the walls were braced apart by wooden beams 10 inches square and 15 feet apart in both directions. This is one of the largest cofferdams of steel ever driven. As an added precaution against the danger of a blowout by the third stratum of quicksand, which had a static head of 75 feet 130 10-inch artesian wells were driven inside the steel cofferdam. 56 similar wells were driven between the steel and the wooden cofferdams to dry out the second stratum of quicksand as much as possible and lessen its flowing character. In November 1919, the work of unwatering the lock site again began. Only 1 foot every other day was taken off. Engineers watched every timber. It was not until January 4, 1920 that the unwatering was complete. The plan had worked. Only in one place had there been any movement. A section of the wooden sheet piling about 300 feet long bulged forward a maximum distance of 3 inches when the bracing caught and stopped it. Then began the work of driving the 24-0 piles on which the lock was to be floated. They are 60 feet long and their tips are 100 feet below the surface of the ground. In March 1920, the work of laying the concrete began. The work was done in 15-foot sections, for only a few of the braces could be moved at one time. When it was finished in April 1921, the lock was in one piece, a solid mass of steel and stone, 20 feet long, 150 feet wide, and 68 feet high, weighing with its gates and machinery 225 tons, and filled with water 350 tons. The concrete floor of the lock is 9 to 12 feet thick, the walls 13 feet wide at the bottom, decreasing to a 2-foot width at the top. 6,000 tons of reinforcing steel were used in the construction and 125 barrels of cement. There are 90 cubic yards of concrete in the structure. 2.5 million feet of lumber were used in building the forms. Usable dimensions of the lock are 640 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 30 feet at minimum low water of the river deep. The top of the lock is 20 feet above the natural ground surface and 6 feet above the highest stage of the Mississippi River on record. To the top, the ground will be sloped on a 150-foot series of terraces. This will brace the walls against the pressure of water within the monolith. It will be developed to a beautiful park. Heavy anchor columns of concrete will hold the walls against the pressure of these artificial hills when the lock is empty. Traffic crosses the canal here by a steel bascule bridge 65 feet wide, with 2 railroad and 2 streetcar tracks, 2 vehicle roadways, and 2 ways for pedestrians. Concrete viaducts lead to the bridge. Gas and water mains, sewer pipes, and telephone, telegraph, and electric wires pass under the lock in conduits cast in the living concrete. Water is admitted into and drained from the lock by culverts cast in the base. These are 8 by 10 feet, narrowing at the opening to 8 by 8 feet, and closed by 8 sluice gates, each operated by a 52 horsepower electric motor. It will be possible to fill or empty the lock in 10 minutes. There are 5 sets of gates to the lock. They are built of steel plates and rolled shapes 4.5 feet thick and weighing 200 tons each. And there is an emergency dam weighing 720 tons, which in case of necessity can be used as a gate. 4 pairs of the gates are of 55-foot size, one of 42 foot. Each gate is operated by a 52 horsepower electric motor. When open, the gates fit flush into the walls of the locks. In the emergency dam is the refinement of precaution designed as it was to save the city from overflow in the remote event of the lock gates failing to work during high water, and to ensure the uninterrupted operation of the lock in normal times if the gates should be sprung by a ship or otherwise put out of commission. This dam consists of 8 girders or sections, 80 feet long, 3 feet wide, and 6 feet high. They weigh 90 tons each. They are kept on a platform near the river end of the lock. Nearby is the crane with a 300 horsepower motor that picks up these girders and drops them into the slots in the walls of the lock. To set this emergency dam is the work of an hour. A ship passing through the lock will not proceed under her own power. There are 6 capstans, 2 at each end of the lock and 2 at the middle, each operated by a 52 horsepower electric motor and capable of developing a pull of 35 pounds, which will work the vessels through. The lock complete, counting the bridge and approaches, costs $7,500. 1.5 million of this is for machinery and $56,000 for the approaches. Henry Goldmark, the New York engineer who designed the gates of the Panama Canal and the New Orleans Industrial Canal, in a letter of March 24, 1921, to the engineering department of the dock board, comments as follows on the remarkable lock. The shop and field work in the lock gates is excellent. The rivet holes match well, and the rivet heads appear to be tight and well formed. The gate leaves seem very straight and true. The lock was designed by George Wells of the George Goethals Company, assisted by Earl Comer, designing engineer of the dock board, and approved by General Goethals. The methods employed to unwater the lock were devised by Wells. Devereux O'Reilly, chief engineer of the dock board, to November 1919 had charge of the details of installing the unwatering and safety devices. He was succeeded by General Arsène Perilliet, who supervised the final unwatering process. Upon his death in October 1920, he was succeeded by Coleman Company in charge of the engineering department, and Gallagher, chief engineer, under whom work is being brought to a conclusion. From first to last, Tyles McChesney, assistant secretary and treasurer of the dock board, rendered intelligent and invaluable service, gathering together and holding the threads of the enterprise, and attending promptly to the multitude of details connected with the prosecution of the work. The lock was formally dedicated May 2, 1921, a ceremony that was the feature of the Mississippi Valley Association's convention in New Orleans. With the dredging of the channel between the river and the lock, a work that should be finished before January 1922, ships will be able to pass from the Mississippi into Lake Pontchartrain. Then New Orleans can plan its next great development. George Wells, George Guthels, son of the General, Colonel Dentos, district engineer at New Orleans, and other engineers who have studied the problem, say that the dredging of a channel from the industrial canal to the Gulf through Lake Pontchartrain or the marshes is feasible, comparatively cheap, and maintenance would be simple. This would shorten the distance from New Orleans to the sea by about 50 miles and would be a vast saving for ships. It is one of the objects towards which the Hudson Dock Board is working. It is Uncle Sam's recognized duty to develop and maintain harbors and channels to the sea. Distance is obviously an important factor. Furthermore, the proposed new outlet would be an important link in the intracoastal canal, connecting with the Warrior River section of Alabama, which the government is developing between the Atlantic and Gulf coasts. A bill was introduced in the Senate in 1920 by Senator Ransdell of Louisiana, providing for the development of the proposed channel. It was not pressed because the canal was far from completed. However, every effort will be made by the dock board from now on to have Uncle Sam take hold. Colonel Dent has for a number of months been studying the feasible routes. He, by the way, is thoroughly convinced of the value of the industrial canal to the development of New Orleans and the commerce of the nation, and has so expressed himself in public. The Pontchartrain road has been laid off by engineers beginning at the canal paralleling the south shore of the Lake Pontchartrain to the south draw of the Southern Railway Bridge, thence to the Rigolets to Cat Island Pass, from there to Cat Island Channel, and so to the deep water of the Gulf, a total distance of 75 miles. Soundings and surface probings have been taken at frequent intervals over the entire route. These have shown the engineers the following: 3/4 of a mile from the south shore of the lake and as far as the railroad drawbridge, a hard bottom is found. The material is principally packed sand, rather fine, with a small amount of clay and occasionally some broken shells. Beyond this distance from the shore, the bottom is softer, consisting of mud mixed with sand. From the bridge over the remainder of the road, the bottom, with the exception of a few sand pockets, is softer blue mud with a large percentage of sand. This soft material has so much tenacity, however, that current and wave wash, which tend to fill up artificially dredged channels, would affect only the surface. The government is conducting large dredging operations in Mobile Bay, Gulfport Channel, Atchafalaya Bay, and the Houston Ship Channel. An outline of the results there will show how feasible the dredging of the Pontchartrain Channel would be, and how much cheaper in comparison. The channel connecting Mobile Bay with the Gulf of Mexico has a bottom very soft for the most part, and with a small percentage of sand. Towards the outer end, the material is black mud, about equal in consistency to the softest material found in the Pontchartrain route. A sounding pole with a 4-inch disc on the end can be easily pushed 3 or 4 feet into the mud and pulled out again. Wave and current action cause the channel to shoal at the rate of 78 to 132 cubic yards per mile per year, depending on the softness of the bottom and the depth. Where the highest rate obtains, the surrounding material consists of soft mud without a trace of sand. Experience shows that where there is a fair percentage of sand in the material adjacent to the channel bed, the shoaling is lessened. In general, the material along the Pontchartrain route contains a greater percentage of sand and is far more tenacious than that along the Mobile Bay Channel. Furthermore, the Pontchartrain route is not exposed to such strong cross currents. The Gulfport Channel is dredged through very soft material, a grayish-blue mud of oozy consistency into which the sounding pole penetrates 6 feet with very little exertion. On top, a small amount of sand is found, but practically none, in the lower stratum. The material is considerably softer than any encountered on the Pontchartrain route, except for one small stretch. Yet the shoaling is not great. Where the shoaling is heaviest, between the end of the pier and Beacon 10, only about 700 cubic yards a mile has to be dredged out every year to maintain the channel. From Beacon 10 out, the average annual maintenance is less than 200 cubic yards a mile. Except for the formal stretch west of the inner entrance to the Cataslan Channel, the bottom on the Pontchartrain route is harder than that of the Gulfport Channel. Therefore, it is reasonable to conclude that the maintenance of the Pontchartrain Channel would not average as high as the outer portion of the Gulfport Channel. The Atchafalaya Bay Ship Channel, extending from the mouth of the Atchafalaya River across the shoal waters of Atchafalaya Bay to about the 20-foot contour of the Gulf, a distance of 15 miles, is through a material of slushy mud with occasional thin pockets of sand. The shoaling runs from 540 to 680 cubic yards a mile a year. The highest rate is obtained in shallow water. Except in the stretch mentioned, the material on the Pontchartrain route is not as soft as on the Atchafalaya, nor are the depths as shoal, nor is there the exposure to cross currents. In the Houston Ship Channel, the material is composed of soft mud with a small amount of sand. A 2-mile stretch through Redfish Reef is practically self-maintaining. For the remainder of the channel, during the 6 years from 1915 to 1920, a total excavation of 13,574 cubic yards was necessary to maintain the depth. This is equivalent to 100 cubic yards a mile a year. The Lake Pontchartrain route is practically unexposed to cross currents, as is the case with the Mobile Bay, Gulfport, Atchafalaya, and, to a certain extent, the outer portion of the Houston Ship Channels. The material along and on the sides of the Pontchartrain route is, with the exception of a small stretch, more tenacious and contains in general a greater proportion of sand than in the case of the neighboring channels mentioned. The channel could therefore be more easily maintained. Engineers estimate that a channel with a 300-foot bottom would be needed. On the south shore of the lake, the side slope should be on the 1:3 ratio, with provision for a 1:5 ratio at the end of 5 years. Dumped on shore, the material would reclaim considerable frontage and eliminate the redeposit of this material in the channel. Through the remainder of the route, the original excavation should be made with side slopes on the 1:5 ratio, with provision made for a 1:10 ratio in 5 years. The dredging of the 75 miles of the Pontchartrain Channel would amount to 97,200 cubic yards, it is estimated by engineers. The cost would be around $10,000. The annual maintenance during the first 5 years would amount to 880 cubic yards, an estimate based on a comparison with the other channels into the Gulf and the character of the material to be excavated. This estimate is considered large, but even at that it is only 118,400 cubic yards a mile a year, and the cost would be about $750 according to Colonel Dent. After 5 years it would be less. Another proposed route, investigated by Colonel Dent, is through Lake Borden. A canal some miles in length through the marsh would connect the lake with the industrial canal. This route has considerable maintenance advantages over the Pontchartrain route. The character of the bottom in Borden is more or less the same as in Pontchartrain. Sooner or later, one of these channels will be built by the government. That it has not already been begun is due to the fact that the canal has not yet been completed and the expected development has not taken place. But there is no doubt that it will. Why government should operate canal? It is the function of the state to provide port facilities in the form of docks, piers, warehouses, grain elevators, mechanical equipment, etc. But it is the duty of the national government to improve harbors, dredge streams, dig canals for navigation and irrigation, erect levees to protect the backcountry, and build locks and dams when needed. These are the premises from which the HUDS and Dock Board reasons that the cost of construction and maintenance of the New Orleans Navigation Canal and Inner Harbor should be assumed by Uncle Sam. It will leave no stone unturned to have him assume the obligation. The Navigation Canal is essentially a harbor improvement. It enables practically unlimited industrial development and commercial interchange. It is an important link in the intracoastal canal system which the government is developing to provide an inland waterway from Boston, Mass. To Brownsville, Texas, and with the dredging of a channel through Lake Pontchartrain to the Gulf, a problem which us engineers have been studying for some time and an undertaking which they have found feasible. It will put the nation's second port about 50 miles closer to the sea. It has considerable military value. Its purpose is, therefore, national. The local interests are secondary. It is no new principle, this obligation of the government. That duty has been recognized by Congress since the United States was. Any rivers and harbors bill will show great and useful expenditure for waterways improvement. The Panama Canal, built by the government, is the greatest example. Coming closer home, there is South Pass at the mouth of the Mississippi. A bar with a 9-foot depth of water blocked the commerce of New Orleans. Under the Rivers and Harbors Act of 1875, Captain James Aids was paid $800 for building the famous jetties to provide a 26-foot channel. Since then, the channel has been deepened to 33 feet. In more recent years, the government began to improve Southwest Pass, the westernmost mouth of the Mississippi. A 9-foot bar was there, too. To increase the depth to 35 feet, the government spent up to 1919 about $1,500 and is still spending. Just as the purpose of the improvements of these channels was to bridge the distance from deep water to deep water. Says Arthur McGurk, Special Counsel of the Dock Board, in a report of February 23, 1921 to the Board. So is the purpose of the Navigation Canal to bridge the distance from the deep water of the river to the proposed deep water channel of the lake. In the annual report of the Chief of Engineers OSA for the fiscal year ending June 30, 1919 are listed the following waterways improvements and canal developments being made by the government. Seattle Lake Washington Ship Canal in City of Seattle from Puget Sound to Lake Original Project, Act of August 18, 1894. Double Lock and Fikes Dam. Length about 8 miles. Total appropriation to date, $345,500. These are only some of the larger projects. Of course, there are a great number of such works all over the country, constructed and maintained by the United States, sometimes alone, and again by cooperation with local authorities. New Orleans was founded because of the strategic value of the location, both from a commercial and a military standpoint. The power that holds New Orleans commands the Mississippi Valley, a fact which the British recognized in 1812 when they tried to capture it. Likewise, when Farragut captured New Orleans, he broke the backbone of the Confederacy. McGurk, in the report to which reference has already been made, discusses the military importance of the industrial canal as follows. A ship canal connecting the river and the lake at New Orleans will be a Panama or a Kiel canal in miniature and double in effectiveness the naval forces defending the valley, as they may be moved to and fro in the canal from the river to the lake. On this line of defense, heavy artillery on mobile mounts can be utilized in addition to heavy ships of the line. That is to say, just as light draft monitors and even floats carrying high-powered rifles were used effectively on the Belgian coast, on the Piave River in Italy, and on the Tigris in Mesopotamia, so may they be used in the defense of the valley on any canal connecting the Mississippi River and Lake Pontchartrain. Changes are constantly occurring in the details of work of defense due to development of armament, munitions, and transport. The never-ending development of range and caliber has assumed vast importance, particularly with reference to the effect on the protection of cities from bombardment. Naval guns are now capable of hurling projectiles to distances of over 50 yards, 28 to 30 miles. For the protection of the valley, we should have a New Orleans armament mounted on floating platforms which will hold the enemy beyond the point where his shells may not reach their objective. And in this operation, the canal, affording means of rapid transport, will render invaluable and essential service. A country's ports are its water gates. Their local importance is comparatively small. They are important or not according to whether they are on trade routes and easily accessible. An infinitesimal part of the trade that flows through New Orleans originates or terminates there. The back country gets the bulk of the business. The development of the harbor is for the service of the interior. It is essentially national. From every point of view, therefore, it is the duty of the national government to take over the navigation canal and release the monies of the state so they may be devoted to the improvement of the waterway with wharves and other works in aid of the nation's commerce. Illustrations: New Orleans first ship launched by Dollett Williams Shipbuilding Co. Illustrations: Scotchy first ship launched on Kennel. Tied to the Mississippi Valley by nearly 14 miles of navigable waterways, and the largest port on the Gulf Coast and the most centrally situated with respect to the Latin American and Oriental trade, New Orleans is naturally a market of deposit. The development of the river service, in which the government set the pace in 1918, is restoring the north and south flow of commerce after a generation of forced haul east and west along the lines of greatest resistance, and New Orleans has become the nation's second port. Its import and export business in 1920 amounted to $1 billion. 90% of the nation's wealth is produced in the valley, of which New Orleans is the maritime capital. It is the source of supply of wheat, corn, sugar, lumber, meat, iron, coal, cotton, oil, agricultural implements, and many other products. It is a market for the products of Latin America and the Orient. With the coordination of river, rail, and maritime facilities and sufficient space for development, it is inevitable that New Orleans should become a mighty manufacturing district. Such enterprises as coke ovens, coal byproduct plants, flour mills, iron furnaces, industrial chemical works, iron and steel rolling mills, shipbuilding and repair plants, automobile factories and assembling plants, soap works, packing plants, lumber yards, building material plants, and yards, warehouses of all kinds, would be encouraged to establish here if given the proper facilities, and the industrial canal is the answer to this need. For under the laws of Louisiana, private industries cannot acquire or lease property on the riverfront. Even before the completion of the canal, the dream has been partly realized with the establishment of 2 large shipyards on the canal, which otherwise would have gone somewhere else, and the building of the Army supply base on the same waterway, largely due to the enterprise of the port. As Colonel E. Dentus, district engineer, said before the Members' Council of the Association of Commerce, February 17, 1921, the industrial canal will be the means of removing the handicaps on New Orleans foreign trade. He continued, but speaking as one who has no interest in it, but who has studied the question deeply, I will say that 5 years from now, if you develop the industrial canal as it should be developed, you will be wondering how on earth you ever got along without it. Before the Constitutional Convention of Louisiana, on April 4, 1921, he elaborated this thought as follows. What New Orleans needs is 50 to 100% more facilities for her port. Last summer the port of New Orleans was congested, but she held her own because other ports were congested. But that may not occur again. If you want to hold your own, you must improve your facilities. Wharves can be built a great deal cheaper on the fixed-level canal with its stable banks. And that is the only place specialized industries can secure water frontage. Sooner or later the government will adopt the free port system by which other countries have pushed their foreign trade to such heights. Free ports have nothing to do with the tariff question. They are simply zones established in which imports may be stored, repacked, manufactured, and then exported without the payment of duties in the first place. Duties for the refund of which the present law makes provision, but only after vexatious delays and expensive red tape. Precautions are taken to prevent smuggling. In the preliminary investigations and recommendations made by the Department of Commerce, New York, San Francisco, and New Orleans have been designated as the first free ports that should be established. With the ample space it offers for expansion, the industrial canal is the logical location for the free zone. Counting the 1500 contract of the Dulot Williams Shipyard, the 500 contract of the Foundation Company Shipyard, the 1300 Army Supply Base, the industrial canal has already brought 3300 of development to New Orleans, 60% more than the cost of the undertaking. More than half of this was for wages and material purchased in New Orleans. The state has gained hundreds of thousands of dollars in taxes. About half the money spent on the industrial canal was wages and helped to increase the population, force business to a new height, raise the value of real estate, and make New Orleans the financial stronghold of the South. What indirect bearing on bringing scores of other industries to New Orleans which did not require a location on the waterway the building of the industrial canal has had, there is no way of ascertaining. Since the work was begun, the Dock Board has received inquiries from 100 or so large enterprises regarding the cost of a site on the canal. That they have not established there is due to the fact that the canal has not yet been completed, and the Dock Board has announced no policy. It is now working on that question with representatives of the Association of Commerce, Joint Traffic Bureau, Clearinghouse Association, Cotton Exchange, Board of Trade, and Steamship Association. There is no use trying to guess at what the policy will be. It is too big a problem, and must be worked out very carefully with reference to a confusing tangle of cross-interests. Two principles have already been categorically laid down by President Hudson and endorsed by the Dock Board at an open meeting of April 5, 1921, with the commercial and industrial interests of the city planning for the polity of the canal. First, that the development of the canal shall not be at the expense of the river. Wharf development will be pushed on the river to meet the legitimate commercial demands of the port. No one is to be forced on the canal. That would hurt the port. It is not thought that such forced development would be necessary, and the canal will be kept open for the specialized industries that can best use the coordination of the river, rail, and maritime facilities. Second, that the control of the property along the canal, owned by the Dock Board, will not go out of the hands of the board. There will be long-term leases up to 99 years, but no outright sale. Furthermore, the private land on the other side of the Dock Board's property will not be allowed to be developed at the expense of the state's interests. So the frontage on the canal will be developed before there is any extensive construction of lateral basins and slips. What will be the rate charged for a site? Will it be based on the actual cost of the canal and its maintenance? Or will the state consider it a business investment like a road or street, and charge the property owners there on less than the cost of construction, collecting the difference in the general progress? That, too, is a question which calls for considerable study before it can be answered. With the industrial canal open, sites available on long leases to business enterprise, and with our tax laws relating to the processes of industry and commerce revised and made more favorable, New Orleans will enter a period of expansion and development on a scale hardly yet dreamed of by her most visioned citizens, with enlarged profit and opportunity for all her people. New taxable wealth will be created rapidly. New needs for taxable property will arise. The tax burden on all will be distributed more widely, and when contrasted with the earning power of such property will become less and less of a burden. This will be so because the water frontage through which the canal is being created for the attraction of many enterprises which cannot locate on the riverfront is all within the limits of the city of New Orleans. With this canal in operation, New Orleans will possess to the fullest degree the three great systems of port operation, public ownership, and operation of the river harbor facilities. Public ownership of the land and private operation of facilities on the industrial canal, and private ownership of the land and private operation of the facilities on the new channel to the sea. No other port in the country has the capacity for this trinity of port systems. No other port possesses such a hinterland as is embraced within the Mississippi Valley, nor so extensive and so complete a system of easy-grade railroads and navigable waterways penetrating its hinterland. No other port holds so strategic a position in the path of the new trade routes connecting the region of greatest productivity with the new markets of greatest promise in Latin America and the Orient. Illustration: Lock Gate. There are 10 like this. Everything is relative. Looking at the total, some may think that the cost of the industrial canal is large. So it is compared with the cost of an irrigation ditch through a 20-acre farm. But comparing the cost with the wealth it is invested to produce has already begun to produce, it dwindles to a mere percentage. And a comparison of construction costs on the industrial canal with similar work done elsewhere during the same time is very much in favor of the former. Witness the following figures shown in the books of the engineering department of the Dock Board. Dredging, including the canal prism and the excavation of the sites of the bridge foundations, siphon and lock, averaged 27.84 cents a cubic yard. The highest cost was in the lock section, from which 609,302 cubic yards were excavated at an average cost of 3,796 cents a cubic yard. On the siphon and Florida Walk Bridge section, including two other deep cuts, the 814,919 cubic yards excavated cost an average of 26.07 cents a cubic yard. On the Louisville-Nashville Bridge section, the 123,466 cubic yards excavated cost an average of 23.63 cents a cubic yard. From there to the lake, 673,787 cubic yards, the average cost was 24.11 cents. Dredging costs were below the original estimates when labor and supplies were 50% cheaper. The 90 cubic yards of concrete in the lock cost an average of 22.50 a cubic yard. This includes cost of material, mixing, building forms, pouring and stripping forms. Mixing and pouring from the time the material was handled from the storehouse or pile averaged 1.20 a cubic yard. It would be hard to find cheaper concrete on a work of similar magnitude anywhere, say the engineers. On the siphon, the concrete work cost more because it was a subterranean job with elaborate shaping. The price there was 35 a cubic yard in place, including material and form work. To drive the 17 bearing piles and 7 traveling piles on which the lock is floated cost an average of 15 cents a running foot. This does not include the cost of the piling. Construction steel cost 12 cents a pound and erection around 4 cents. These were standard prices. The lock gates weighing 285 pounds cost 845,600 in place. This does not include opening and closing machinery. 3 of the bascule bridges crossing the canal, weighing 600 pounds each, cost 250 each erected. The 4th bridge near the lock, weighing 100 pounds, cost 200 erected. This is for superstructure only, it does not include the foundation. The emergency dam bridge weighing 373 pounds and its 256 pounds of turning machinery cost 96,728 in place. Hoisting machinery cost 40 more. The 8 girders of the emergency dam, weighing 90 tons each at 240 a ton, cost 172,800. Machinery for working the 10 lock gates, the 8 filling gates, and the 6 capstans 2452 horsepower electric motors cost 21,479. New Orleans. The plant for unmotering the lock, consisting of 1 pump with a capacity of 15 gallons a minute, and 2 with a capacity of 250 gallons each, cost erected 11. Total mechanical equipment used on the industrial canal weighs 14,500 tons. Its cost, including powerhouse electrical connections, is 1,516. Plant and equipment for building the canal, including locomotives, cranes, pile rivers, dredges, tools, cost 781,232. Depreciation up to February 1921 is set at 266,874, leaving a balance of 514,358 carried as assets. Much of this has already been sold, and more will be disposed of. Following are the firms that executed contracts on the industrial canal. Outside New Orleans. Lock gates and emergency dam girders, McClintock Marshall Construction Company, Pittsburgh, PA, designed by Goldmark Harris Company, New York. Filling gates, Coffin Valve Company, Indian Orchard, Mass. Miscellaneous valve equipment, Ludlow Valve Company, Troy, NE. Capstans, American Engineering Company, Philadelphia, PA. Mooring Post Shipbuilding Products Company, New York, NE. Miter Gate Moving Machines, Focus Machine Works, Pittsburgh, PA. Motors, control boards and miscellaneous electrical equipment, General Electric Company, Schenectady, NE. Bridge Crane and Bascule Bridges, Bethlehem Steel Corporation, Steelton, PA, former designed by Goldmark Harris Company, New York, NE, latter by Struss Bascule Bridge Company, Chicago, Illinois. Steel Sheet Paling, Lackawanna Steel Company, Buffalo, New York. Hoists and Cranes, Orton Steinbrenner, Huntington, and American Hoist and Derrick Company, Paul, Maine. Conveyor Equipment, Webster Company, Tiffany O'Wheel, Barker Green Company, Aurora, Ill. Pipos Cast Iron Pipe Company, Birmingham, Allah. Lumber and Pelling, Hammond Lumber Company, Hammond, La. Great Southern Lumber Company, Bogalusa, La. Dredges, Bowers Southern Dredging Company, Galveston, Texas. Atlantic, Gulf and Pacific Company, Mobile, Allah. In New Orleans. Cinder and Earth Fell, Thomas M. Johnson. Levee Work, Hercules Construction Company, Hampton Reynolds. Sand and Gravel Yank Service Inc., Johnston Company. Cement Atlas, Portland Cement Company, the Mitchell Lumber and Brick Company being local agents. Lumber and Pelling, Salmon Brick and Lumber Company, Care Company. Coal Kirkpatrick Coal Company, Tennessee Coal Iron and Ore Company. Reinforcing Steel and Supplies, Tennessee Coal Iron and Ore Company, Olson. Concrete Mixers, Fairbanks Company. Repairs and Castings, Dibert, Bancroft, Ross, Jobert, Goslin Machinery and Foundry Company, Stern Foundry and Machinery Company. Other port facilities. Says Royce Messelby in his book on port and terminal facilities, a subject on which he is considered an authority. Is the most advanced port in America in respect to scientific policy. The Shipping Board echoed the compliment in its report of its Port and Harbor Facilities Commission of April 1919 when it said, New Orleans ranks high among the ports of the United States for volume of business and presents a very successful example of the public ownership and operation of port facilities. It is one of the best equipped and coordinated ports of the country. New Orleans is the principal freshwater ocean harbor in the United States. Landlocked and protected from storms, it is the safest harbor on the Gulf Coast. Almost unlimited is the number of vessels that can be accommodated at anchor. Alongside the wharves, the water is from 30 to 70 feet deep. The government maintains a 33-foot channel at the mouth of the river. Port of New Orleans takes in about 21 miles of this harbor on both sides of the river. This gives a river frontage of 41.4 miles, which is under the jurisdiction of the Dock Board, an agency of the state. The board has to date improved 7 miles of the east bank of the river with wharves, steel sheds, cotton warehouses, a grain elevator, and a coal handling plant of most modern type, together with other facilities for loading and unloading. Authority has been granted to issue 6,500 in bonds for increasing these facilities. Wharves, elevators, and warehouses built by railroads and industrial plants on both sides of the river bring up the total improved portion of the port to 45 linear feet, capable of berthing 90 vessels 500 feet long. These facilities are coordinated by the only municipally owned and operated belt railroad in the United States, which saves the shipper much money. More than 60 steamship lines connect the port with the world markets, the government barge line, a number of steamboat lines, and 12 railroad lines connected with the producing and consuming sections of the United States. Illustration: bull wheel, part of operating machinery for lock gates. Now nearing completion is the public coal handling plant. Built by the Dock Board to develop the business in cargo coal, it is costing more than $1,000 and will have a capacity of 25 tons. It is of the belt conveyor type. The plant will be able to unload coal from railway cars into a storage pile 2, unload coal from cars into steamers or barges 3, load coal from storage pile into steamers or barges 4. Unload coal from barges into steamers and storage pile 5. Load coal from barges or storage pile into cars. At the 750-foot wharf, the plant can take care of 3 ships at one time with a maximum loading capacity of 800 to 10 tons and more. Other coaling facilities at the port are furnished by Illinois Central Railroad tipple with capacity of 300 tons and more. New Orleans Coal Company, 2 tipples, capacity 150 and 350 tons and more, floating collier to coal ships while freight is being taken aboard at the wharf, capacity 175 tons and more, collier capacity 150 tons and more. Alabama and New Orleans Transportation Company storage plant with loading towers on Lake Board and Canal just below the city. American Sugar Refining Company coal plant, capacity 70 tons and more, for receiving coal from barges and delivering it to boiler house. Monongahela River Coal and Coke Company floating collier. Fuel oil facilities for bunkering purposes are furnished by Gulf Refining Company, storage capacity 100 barrels, bunkering capacity 800 barrels and more. Texas Oil Company, storage capacity 150 barrels, bunkering capacity 500 barrels and more. Sinclair Refining Company, storage capacity 250 barrels, bunkering capacity 500 barrels and more. Standard Oil Company, storage capacity 110 336 barrels, bunkering capacity 10 barrels and more. In the Yankee Dry Dock and Ship Repair Company, New Orleans has the largest ship repair plant south of Newport News. The plant is on the Mississippi River, adjacent to the industrial canal. It has a 500-foot wharf and 3 dry docks of 60, 80, and 10 tons capacity, respectively. These can be joined for lifting the very large ships. It is equipped with the latest and most powerful machinery and has been a strong factor in developing the port. The Johnson Iron Works and Shipbuilding Company likewise has facilities for wood repairing, caulking, painting, and scraping of vessels, as well as iron work. It has 3 docks, one 234 feet long, one 334 feet long, and a small one for lifting barges and small river tugs. At the United States Naval Yard is a dock of 15 tons capacity. This is placed at the service of commercial vessels when private docks are not available. The public cotton warehouse and public grain elevator are among the most modern facilities in the country. Both plants are of reinforced concrete throughout, ensuring a low insurance rate. The cotton warehouse comprises 5 units with a total storage capacity at one time of 320 bales and an annual handling capacity of 200. High-density presses compress this cotton to 34 pounds per cubic foot, saving the exporter 20% on steamship freight rates. The insurance rate on storage cotton is 24 cents per 100 a year. Cotton is handled by dock board employees licensed by the New Orleans Cotton Exchange under rules and regulations laid down by the Department of Agriculture. Warehouse receipts may be discounted at the banks. Cotton can be handled cheaper here than at any other warehouse in the country. Storage capacity of the public grain elevator is 622 bushels. This is about 25% of the grain elevator storage capacity of the port, but the public elevator handles 60% of the business, proving its efficiency. Its unloading capacity is 60 bushels a day from barges or ships and 200 bushels from cars. Loading capacity into ships is 100 bushels and hard to 1 or 4 vessels simultaneously. Fireproof and equipped with a modern dust collecting system, this facility is considered one of the best in the country. Other grain elevators at New Orleans are operated by Southern Railway, capacity 375 bushels. Illinois Central Railroad, 2 elevators, capacity 500 bushels. Trans-Mississippi Terminal Railroad Company, 2 elevators, capacity 350 bushels. Wharves owned and controlled by the dock board measure 28,872 linear feet in length with an area of 230,894 square feet. 20 of these 34 wharves are covered with steel shades. Wharves operated by the railroads on both sides of the river increase the port facilities as follows. Southern Railway, 2 concrete and steel covered docks, 1 a 2-story structure, 1 is 150 by 300 feet with a floor space of 195 square feet, 1 is 150 by 680 feet on the lower floor, and 120 by 680 on the upper, with a combined area of 453 square feet floor space. Morgan's Louisiana and Texas Railroad and Steamship Company wharf space 112 square feet, covered space 117,200 square feet. Trans-Mississippi Terminal Railroad Company wharf No. 1, 3 berths 281,904 square feet, No. 2, 1 berth 94,350 square feet, No. 3, 1 berth 725 square feet, most of it covered. Oil wharf 15 square feet. The New Orleans Army Supply Base has a 2-story wharf 20 feet long by 140 feet wide. The lower floor of the wharf is leased by the dock board. Back of it are the 3 warehouses, each 140 by 600 feet and 6 stories in height. 7 industrial plants have loading and unloading facilities on the river. The dock board does not lease or part with the control of these and controls the following charges: harbor fees, dockage, sheddage, wharfage, etc. Open storage on riverfront contiguous to wharves totals 169,900 square feet. There is a great deal of potential open storage space away from the wharves and along railroad tracks, which could be reached by switches. For the storage of coffee, alcohol, sisal, sugar, and general commodities, private warehouses offer a floor space of 200 square feet. Railroads serving New Orleans are the Public Belt, Illinois Central, Yazoo, Mississippi Valley, Gulf Coast Lines, Louisiana Railway Navigation Company, Louisville, Nashville, Louisiana Southern, Missouri Pacific, Texas Pacific, New Orleans Lower Coast, Morgan's Louisiana Texas Railroad and Steamship Company, Southern Pacific, Southern Railway, and New Orleans Great Northern. Storage track capacity of New Orleans for export traffic totals 15,156 cars. Track facilities alongside the wharves will accommodate 600 cars. New Orleans can handle at the grain elevators and wharves 30 cars a day. Wharves are served exclusively by the Public Belt Railroad. The industrial canal will be similarly served. The Public Belt Railroad assumes the obligations of a common carrier operating under appropriate traffic rules and regulations. The switching charge is $70 a car regardless of the distance. On uncompressed cotton and linters, the charge is $4.50. The government barge line connects New Orleans with the Warrior River section of Alabama and the upper Mississippi Valley, including a great deal of inland territory to which river and rail differential rates apply as far as views. It is operating a fleet of 2 0-ton steel-covered barges and 1 800-horsepower towboats. There is a weekly service. Rates are 20% cheaper than rail rates. The port is supplied with some of the most modern freight handling machinery. Harbor dues and other expenses are low. The water supply for drinking purposes and boilers meets the strongest tests. How advantageously situated is New Orleans will be seen from the following comparison of distances. Illustration: ship lock on the inner harbor, navigation canal at the port of New Orleans. Comparison of distances by and between New Orleans and New York and principal cities. Distances in statute miles furnished by War Department. New York, New Orleans, Atlanta 846 498, Baltimore 188 184, Birmingham 143 348, Boston 235 607, Buffalo 442 275, Charleston 739 776, Chattanooga 846 498, Chicago 912 Cincinnati 781 836, Cleveland 584 192, Dallas 642 515, Denver 932 356, Detroit 693 100, Duluth 391 340, El Paso 301 195, Galveston 782 410, Indianapolis 827 888, Kansas City 335 867, Little Rock 290 487, Louisville 867 749, Memphis 156 396, Minneapolis 332 285, Mobile 231 141, Norfolk 347 193, Oklahoma City 643 856, Omaha 402 170, Pittsburgh 444 142, Philadelphia 91 281, Port Townsend 199 979, Portland, Oregon 204 746, Salt Lake City 442 928, San Antonio 943 571, San Francisco 191 482, Savannah 845 661, Seattle 151 931, Slows 158 701, Tulsa 705 140, Washington 228 144. Comparison of distances by water routes between New Orleans and New York to principal ports of the world. Distances in nautical miles supplied by Hydrographic Office Navy Department. Land routes in statute miles supplied by War Department. New York, New Orleans, Antwerp 325 4 853 Bombay via Suez 8 129 536 via Cape of Good Hope 11 250 11 848 Buenos Aires 5 868 6 318 Kilo via Panama 3 392 2 764 via Tehuantepec 4 246 2 991 Cape Town 6 851 7 374 Cullen, eastern end of Panama Canal 1 981 1 380 Havana 1 227 597 Hong Kong via Panama 11 431 10 830 via rail to San Francisco 9 277 8 568 Honolulu via Panama 686 685 via rail to San Francisco 5 288 4 579 Liverpool 353 4 553 London 3 233 4 507 Manila via Panama 11 546 10 993 Yokohama and San Francisco 9 488 771 Yokohama and Port Townsend 9 192 8 972 Melbourne via San Francisco 10 231 9 522 via Panama 10 28 9 424 via Tehuantepec 9 852 8 604 via Suez Canal 12 981 14 303 Mexico City by land and water 2 399 1 172 by land 2 898 1 526 New Orleans land 1 372 water 1 741 Nome Alaska via San Francisco 5 896 5 187 via Port Townsend 5 555 5 335 via Panama 8 10 7 410 Panama Western and Canal via Canal and Cullen 228 1 427 Pernambuco Brazil 3 696 3 969 Rio de Janeiro 4 778 5 218 San Juan 1 428 1 539 Singapore via Yokohama and Panama 13 104 12 503 via Suez 10 170 11 560 San Francisco 3 191 2 482 via Tehuantepec 4 415 3 191 via Panama 5 304 4 704 Tehuantepec eastern end of Railroad 2 36 812 Valparaiso via Panama 4 637 435 Yokohama via Honolulu and Tehuantepec 9 243 7 995 via Honolulu and Panama 10 93 9 492 via Panama 9 869 9 268 by land